This is the Capital Farm Credit Wednesday night podcast, our weekly look at the athletic scene around the area, what happened last week, and what's going on this week. I'm here with my partner via Zoom, Dan Youngblood. And tonight, Dan, we more or less wrap up the 2021 school year and take a look back. We do not have a guest tonight. We're just going to take a look back at some of the special moments that occurred during 2021 and maybe take a brief look ahead at 21-22 at the tail end of this.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to believe, but we're through this school year. We just finished up with the FCA All-Star Games last weekend, following a couple of baseball teams with trips to the state tournament there, and a long, kind of arduous, really kind of historic school year, given everything that happened with COVID and all of that. Is behind us, which is, like I said, hard to believe. It went really, really quickly. We obviously stayed busy throughout it, but a lot of highs, and I think we're going to get a chance to talk about a lot of those in this podcast. There are a lot of really, the significant achievements that we saw some teams and some individuals accomplish this year, and I think it'll be fun to get to kind of recap some of those throughout this podcast tonight.
It went quick, as you mentioned, but it also went, I think, all things considered, remarkably well, remarkably smooth. We had some games that were postponed early on, rescheduled early on during the football season, but overall, for the most part, this thing went like clockwork. If you consider, I mean, how much how much potential for problems there were.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've talked about this before in podcasts, particularly in the fall when we were in the middle, in the thick of kind of this COVID deal. But I think a lot of people deserve a lot of credit for kind of coming together and coming up with some real common sense solutions to basically this problem. I mean, how are we going to get through this season, given all of the things that we kind of have to work around and through? And I think you're right. Other than, I mean, a handful of cancellations or postponements during football season, things really went off without a hitch, and they did so safely, and they did so responsibly. And like I said, a lot of people deserve a lot of credit, and I think it's important. Now, we talked about that also early in the season, how this is important for these kids. Particularly last year during the spring when we did our what might have been series, we talked about so many things that our area kids missed out on. I think it was really important that this group of seniors in particular was able to get to go do a lot of the things that their predecessors missed. So I'm really pleased with the way things went. I think you're right. Things went remarkably smoothly given the circumstances. And again, just a lot of credit goes to the coaches, a lot of credit goes to the kids, a lot of credit goes to the UIL and really everyone that kind of helped keep this ship sailing.
Last year, when they had mentioned that they were going to play football season in its entirety, I was thinking, right, sure we are. We're going to try, but we're going to get about 3 or 4 weeks into the season, and we're going to see cancellations all over the place. That's the way I felt it was going to go down, but it really did not. It didn't. And we had a number of cancellations, but for the most part, the season, I mean, for the most part, football season in its entirety was played for the most part.
Yeah. I mean, other than a couple of casualties, when you look at the Coleman football team was one I think was really one of the more heartbreaking stories in the big country this year. A Coleman team that had really fought really hard to get back to the playoffs, didn't get that opportunity because they had their season shut down right at the end by COVID. But I mean, aside from that one notable exception, I mean, just about everyone else got the opportunity. If they earned an opportunity to play in the postseason, they got to play it, which I think was a really big deal. And honestly, I think there were a lot of people that felt like you did when they announced their plan for the season. First of all, I know you and I were just kind of on pins and needles wanting to see what the UIL's plan was. And when they finally announced it, I think there were a lot of people like, yeah, we'll see. But
I was wondering how we were going to extend. The what might have been series all the way through Christmas.
Yeah,
that would have been a challenge.
Would have been a massive challenge, but fortunately we didn't have to. And fortunately, things went a lot smoother than probably anyone anticipated. I mean, like I said, there were some one-off cancellations. I mean, you're going to look back in time and wonder, why did Wiley play 8 games in 2020? But 2020. But I mean, other than that, I mean, a couple of weird things like that. I mean, everybody got the opportunity to finish their season for the most part. And then once you got into the spring, things really went pretty normally. So, yeah, I think all things considered, everyone has to be really pleased just with the way things turned out and the fact that these kids got the opportunity to experience a relatively normal school year, given the really abnormal circumstances.
Before we jump into this week's show, we need to thank our primary sponsor, Capital Farm Credit, with offices all over Texas, including Stanford and Abilene. Buy your own slice of Texas with Capital Farm Credit. Together, we're better. And with that, it is time to take a look back at the 2021 school year and some of the highlights for Big Country athletics. And right off the top, we have to mention Jim Ned winning a Class 3A D1 state championship with a thrilling comeback against Hallettsville. It went into overtime. And this is a team that was down 21-0 in the second quarter and rallied to win at Jerry World in just an absolute thriller.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can't talk about this past school year without, like you said, leading off with this Jim Ned team, what it was able to accomplish. Just a remarkable run and really a thrilling run from start to finish. They had the one slip up in their season opener against Ballinger, which you saw. And then from that point forward, ran the table, beat that Hallettsville team twice, really in similar fashion. They got down a couple scores or 3 scores in the state championship game in both games, and then were able to fight their way back and did it with what was kind of a hallmark of that team, was just its mental toughness, its defensive toughness, and then timely offense. When they needed to score, they found a way to move the ball and score. But this was a really, really good Jim Ned team, a very tough Jim Ned team, one that was easy to kind of root for just with the way they played. This team was never out of a game. They never gave up. They never got down on each other. And I think that was a big part of the reason that they were able to accomplish what they did.
If you had told me they were going to run the table after losing to Ballinger in week 1, and that's no knock against that good Ballinger team. But, I mean, they lose to Ballinger on opening night. If you had told me they were going to run the table and win the D1 state championship from that point forward, I would have asked you, what have you been nipping at? I didn't see it coming. It may have been the best thing. It may have been the best thing for them to lose that opener like that, because from that point forward, they realized that, they could get beat if they didn't bring their absolute A game. And, for the most part, for the rest of the year, that's all we saw out of Jim Ned was their A game.
Yeah, and they faced some adversity early on, obviously, with that loss. And then with some cancellations due to COVID, they were supposed to play both Snyder and Sweetwater, which would have been really fun games. And both of those got wiped out. Those were casualties of the COVID schedule. But at the same time, that allowed them to schedule that first Hallettsville game, which I think was a really important one for them, because that kind of showed what they were capable of at that point, beating a top 5, top 10 team early in the season. And then, of course, later in the season when they get that big playoff game against Brock, I think that was the one where that was the one that really opened people's eyes to what this team was capable of. When they beat Brock, I think everybody was like, okay, this team can win a state championship. And yes, sure enough, they did.
The winner of that Brock game may have gone on to win the state championship regardless of who won it. Yeah. And if we look back at that Brock game, Jim Ned against Brock, Jim Ned had a game plan going in and they executed it to perfection. Everything that needed to happen that day did happen, including, a special teams touchdown, etc. If they played that game 10 times, Brock may have won 5. It was that close and gone on to win a state championship. So, but that was a huge moment. And then coming back and beating again a week later, beating a great team from Mount Vernon, 24-17, Art Briles club. That's another ball club. That's another game that could have gone either way there.
And that was one, and that's what's funny is they had so many of these games because they played such a tough schedule. Every game was tough, and so many of them came down to a key fourth quarter play here and there. And that Mount Vernon game came to 2 huge stops late in the game, forcing turnovers on their half of the field. But that just kind of showed the type of team that this Jim Ned team was. They would bend sometimes, but they did not break. And you're right, Mount Vernon was playing exceptional football going into that, particularly on the offensive side of the ball. And Jim Ned really kind of slowed him down. And it's particularly late in that game when Mount Vernon needed to score to overtake them, they couldn't do it. Jim Ned made plays when they needed to. But that was just a sign of what this team was capable of, a sign of really the kind of the spirit of this team. And it was a really fun one to follow.
Some more memories of 2020 football. A very slow start for Eastland due to COVID, a combination of COVID and some disciplinary issue that came up. And they ended up losing, if memory serves me, their first 4 ball games of the year before really catching fire and going on and getting all the way to the regional championship where they lost big to Gunner 61-28. we speculated all year, can Eastland take Gunner? Can they take Gunner? We got our answer at the end, and we also had to say goodbye to one of the Big Country's truly great quarterbacks over the last several years in Baron Morton. But hats off to Eastland. That was, I mean, they ended up having a great season. They just ran into a monstrous Gunner team in the Region 1 championship.
Yeah, they did, but you're right. They got on a roll there after that slow start, where they were playing really well, and to where going into that Gunter game, it wasn't at all a foregone conclusion. I think everyone expected that them to go out there and really compete. Unfortunately, I mean, they got down big early, and it just kind of snowballed on them. But this Eastland team, you look at some of the wins they did have in the playoffs, particularly that win over Holiday. That was a really, really good Holiday team that they were able to nip 28-24. And I think, I mean, that was just kind of indicative of the type of team they had this year too. Is it didn't end the way they wanted it to, particularly when you're talking about a guy, a career like the one that Baron Morton had. But a great season for them, and it was fun to watch them get on the roll they did. Anytime you make it to a region championship, come within a win of a state semifinal game, you've done something pretty special.
We had another club in Class 2A D1 reach a regional championship. The Cisco Lobos pushed all the way to the Region 1 championship in Class 2A. They fell to just a monstrous Post team, 33-0 at ACU. You were there that night, and so was I. Post was just a magnificent football team. But Cisco's got a lot of their talent coming back, as always, next year, and they will be, again, a regional threat. Another thing that comes to mind, we had two great football teams at the D2 level. We had, what we were speculating might be a state championship team out of Hamlin that fell in the regional. They suffered some injuries there late and fell to Munster 31-28. And then the Albany Lions got on a roll late as well and fell to a great Winthorst team, 18-13. They both fell in the regional semis.
And then one other area team I think is worth mentioning is the San Saba Armadillos, who probably didn't get quite as far as they wanted to, but this was a group of players that really helped turn the tide for that program and really helped that program get to where it is now and help the expectations for it get to where they are now. So I think they deserve some mention as well, particularly given what they had accomplished going into the playoffs. This was a team that had a really special season as well. And before we move on from football, a couple of things I'd like to mention just on the local front. I think Abilene High bears some mentioning. To get to the third round of the playoffs after a slow start themselves was a big deal. They got Denton Geyer in the third round and lost that one, but they played it without their quarterback, Abel Ramirez. Had Jashari Houston, a receiver, playing quarterback that game and really competed really hard. And I think that was kind of the hallmark of that team, was just the way they competed. And I think that was really them taking on the personality of their coach, Mike Fullen, who battled through cancer and chemo this season to help them to return to the team and kind of help them, guide them through the playoffs. So that was I thought a really special story. And then the other one that I think bears some mentioning is just Wiley getting back to the playoffs, to the playoffs for the first time in the 5A era. I think that was a really big stepping stone for them going forward as well, because they had a couple of really tough seasons since making that jump. I mean, there was a lot of talk about, can they handle that? And I thought this team did a good job of answering a lot of those questions, competing really hard, competing really well, getting them back to the playoffs, and really putting them in position to darn near knock off a good Grapevine team in the by-district round. So there were some special things done on the local front as well. Cooper got bounced in the first round by Mansfield Summit. I know that was a disappointing end, but they also had another strong season as well. So I think a really a fun football season this year, both in and outside of the boundaries of Abilene.
And when you start talking about who had the best overall year, 2021, one school we have to mention is at the Class 1A level. Let's talk about Westbrook. We're going to mention them in different sports throughout this podcast. We can start with football, where the Wildcats went to the regional championship and lost to Sterling City 64-32. Sterling City, if memory serves me, is the only team that beat them. They beat them twice this year, once during the regular season, and then again in the regional championship.
Yeah, for sure. That was a really special season and really special school year for that Westbrook boys group. Did some really nice things in basketball and later in baseball. So this was a group that I think a lot of people remember just for kind of the foundation they helped lay. It was a really neat year for them, but it did start in football season where they really took some massive steps forward and kind of had a historic season. So it was fun to watch, and that kind of served, I thought, is kind of a sign of things to come later in the school year with that basketball group, with that baseball team. And then by the time you finish the school, you realize just what this group did for that program, really program wide. It was pretty cool to watch.
And with that, we want to touch a little bit on volleyball. As far as I'm concerned, the Big Country team of the year was the Albany Lions. They advanced all the way to the state semifinals, where they fell to defending state champion Crawford. Crawford that eventually was the state runner-up last season, but they leave with a 22-6 record, and probably, arguably, the best volleyball team that Albany has ever produced, and certainly one of the best that the Big Country's produced over the last few years.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I don't think there's any question this year when you look at just the totality of the season that Albany was the Big Country, team of the year for volleyball. Just to make it to the state semifinals is obviously a huge accomplishment. And one of the things I think is really neat this season was that Coach MJ Renault, in leading that team to the state semifinals, matched what was an accomplishment for her as a player back when she was MJ Vickers playing for her mom. She took them to the state semifinals that year as well. So I thought it kind of came full circle, but that was a neat story. And then just when you look at what that family has meant to that program, it's pretty cool. And this is an Albany program that certainly, I think that the trajectory is still pointed upward for. So a really neat story for Albany, and a really special season, and one that they won't forget, I don't think, anytime soon.
Okay, another club I think that we need to mention would be the Stephenville Honeybees that fell in the Class 4A regional quarterfinals. They drive 3 rounds deep, and they fell in a classic matchup against Graham, one of the top matches that we saw all year, 22-25, 25-17, 26-24, 25-27, and 15-11, went 5 sets.
Yeah, and that's about as close as you get. When it goes 5 sets, 4 of them are decided by 4 points or less. Those were 2 really evenly matched teams. If Stephenville very easily could have won that. Unfortunately, they did see their season end in the 3rd round, but still getting to the 3rd round in the Class 4A playoffs, I mean, that's no small accomplishment. And a couple other teams that were able to reach the region quarterfinals that, again, I think are worth mentioning. The Cooper Lady Cougars, that was a really big playoff run for them. They got to the regional quarterfinals before falling in 4 games to Canyon Randall. And then we had a couple of 1A teams make it to that same round as well. Aspermont getting there before falling to Van Horn. Benjamin doing the same before falling to Very Best. So we had some teams that did some nice things this year and made it a really fun volleyball season to cover. And which was fun because this was our first season to really dive into volleyball, which I think you and I both enjoyed.
All right, Dan, and with that, we're going to jump into basketball. We'll start on the girls' side. The team that comes to mind first for me would be the Jim Ned Lady Indians, who pushed all the way to the regional semifinals, where they just ran into a buzzsaw in shallow water. That was a great shallow water basketball team that eliminated them 55-34. But another great season for the Jim Ned Lady Indians. They'll be back again, and that they'll be a regional threat.
Yeah, and they were kind of the flag bearers for our area in what's usually a really good 3A bracket for us. Brock was a little bit down this year. Wall didn't quite make the same type of run they're used to making, following the area round. But Jim Ned to get to the region tournament once again. And unfortunately, like you said, they just ran into a buzzsaw in shallow water. But that was another really good Jim Ned team. And like you said, that program's not going anywhere. They're going to continue to put out great basketball teams, and they're going to be fun to watch in the years ahead as well.
One of the big upsets on the girls' side that just I don't know, that still resonates with me. We expected a really deep run from the Haskell Maidens this year. They were looking, like one of their vintage teams. And they run into a 4 seed from Cisco, who just happened to put it all together. And it really just shows you what can happen during the playoffs. It turned out to be one of the biggest upsets of the year, really, in any sport. Cisco 44, Haskell 41, eliminating the Maidens, allowing Cisco to move on to the regional semis, where they got beat by Munster, and a great Munster team, by the way. But that game there, just goes to show you that on any given night, if you don't shoot well or the other team gets hot, you just can't take it. You cannot take anything for granted. I don't care if it's a 1 against a 4. You cannot.
No, and I think one of the things that speaks to is just how good that district was. When you look, you had Cisco, Haskell, and Stanford all in the region quarterfinals, and you very well could have had Anson in there as well had they not gotten stuck playing Lipan in the second round, which is about as tough a draw as you could have possibly had. So I think that this Cisco team, that 4 seed for this team was a little bit misleading, and just based on the talent they had. Any team that has Sophia Hurtado, at that forward position, post position, is going to be a tough one to beat, particularly if you have some guards that can play as Cisco does. But I still agree with you. With the way Haskell was playing, I don't think either of us saw that outcome happening.
No. And I don't mean to insinuate that Haskell didn't go in taking Cisco very seriously. They did. But all I'm saying is there's never any guarantees. And that game there fully illustrated it. It was one of the biggest upsets of the school year.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I love about high school basketball, and I talk about that a lot when we get on these podcasts during basketball season, is that in a lot of sports,
you talk a lot, period.
That's true.
You talk a lot, period.
That's definitely
Podcast
true.
or not.
That's true. But I just in a lot of sports, particularly football, when you get to the later rounds of the playoffs, really early rounds of the playoffs, middle rounds of the playoffs, you don't see a whole lot of upsets. And basketball is one of those sports that really anything can happen. Like you see some massive upsets every year that you don't expect to see. And I think that adds some excitement to those basketball playoffs. And we saw some that for our team and some against our teams. And in this case, it was both, and that we covered both Cisco and Haskell. But that Cisco team was, I think, one of the stories of the year to get to the region semifinals after having probably a little bit of a disappointing regular season by their standards. Just showed what this team, the talent that it had, and it was cool to see them kind of get everything put together at the right time. But they were one of several teams that made deep runs for us this year. And one I think we've got to mention is the San Saba girls, who came within an eyelash of a state tournament trip. They lost to Snook 28-25 in the region championship game. And this was a team that team could defend. They had a couple of really good players that they could score the basketball for them, that I got to see out at the FCA girls game not too long ago. But that was a really good team, a really special team. And that one, like I said, they were not real far off from making it to a state tournament.
And going back to Westbrook, now this is the girls' side, of course. Westbrook did push to the state semifinals where they ran into perennial power Nazareth and fell 48-17. But in fairness to Westbrook, that blowout loss to Nazareth is not the first one that we have seen for a team coming out of our region facing Nazareth. Nazareth pretty well does this to just about everybody it faces.
Yeah, and that's not the story for that Westbrook team this year. The story was getting to their first state tournament and getting through that region tournament, which was a really fun one when you had a young Hermley team that was kind of finding its way and was not necessarily expected to be there. You had Rankin, Very Best, which was the defending region championship that had knocked off Hermley in what probably was considered a little bit of an upset the previous season, and then a really good Rankin team. So Westbrook got through Very Best in the region semifinals, which was a huge deal because that was the defending region champion, and then really took care of Rankin the next round, beat them by 21 points. But obviously, like you said, they did run into that buzzsaw, and Nazareth is absolutely that. I really wish that it wasn't seeded the way it was, that our team gets stuck playing Nazareth in the semifinals each year, but there's no shame in going down to a state tournament situation and losing to Nazareth, even if it is a lopsided outcome, just because that team is so good. That is a basketball factory.
All right, we're going to switch over to the boys' side. Let's talk about some of the deep runs we had over there on that side. We can start at the Class 3A level with Brock, which pushed all the way to the Class 3A state semifinals, losing to Tatum 62-45. But another outstanding effort from the Brock Eagles, always a threat.
Definitely. And I got to see them at the region tournament and in the region championship game against Shallowater, which was a fantastic game. Brock won that one 49-46 to get to state in a game that was really back and forth. They had to make some big plays late in that game in the fourth quarter to escape that one, and were able to. But this was kind of a vintage Brock team. They had a lot of players that could do a lot of different things well, and you put it all together and you've got a really good basketball team. They defend well. They've got some kids who can hit shots. They've got one of the area's best posts in Nathan Jones. and some of those kids are back, including Jones. So it's going to be fun to see what that team can put together next year as well. But a really fun run, and they had some big wins through the playoffs to get to that one against Tatum, where unfortunately things just didn't kind of go their way. They got behind early in that one, and it just again kind of snowballed on them.
All right. Another deep run for Cisco in boys basketball, another regional championship appearance. They fell to Post in football, and they fell to Lipan in basketball, but their move down to Class 2A did benefit the Lobos. I mean, here they are threatening for regional championships in both sports. It's nice to see them back threatening for regional titles. They just fell to Lipan 59-52 in boys hoops, and that's a ball game they could have won. I was there.
Exactly. Yeah, and like you said, those are a lot of the same players, a lot of the same kids that led them to the region championship game in football were on that same basketball team. And that was a Cisco team that went through some adversity this year. They had some key players out at different times. In fact, really, they didn't get all of their pieces together until relatively late in the season. And then once they did, they had some really impressive wins in the playoffs and some hard-fought wins as well to get to that championship game against Lipan. You look at some of those; they beat Poolville 40-38. In the region semifinals, it was 64-61 over Bogota Rivercrest, and then that game against Lipan, which again, like you said, they could have won. That was not a game that was not a lopsided outcome at all. But this was a really good, fun Cisco team to watch. A very guard-oriented. Some kids that could really shoot the ball, could really score the ball, and they found ways. They didn't have a whole lot of size, but they found ways to defend inside. So a fun team to follow, and that was, I think, definitely one of the big stories this year.
More deep runs for the boys on the boys' side, and two of them involve text line. We had the Jayton Jaybirds face text line in a regional semifinal in fall, 57-55. Then we saw text line eliminate another one of our ball clubs, Eula, 58-56. 2 one-bucket victories over two of our best teams. And before that, Dan, we saw a classic between Eula and Westbrook that went right down to the wire, a one-point ball game, 52-51 in a classic. Eula advancing over Westbrook. That came down right to the last shot. And another, like we said, keep an eye on Westbrook as we move through this podcast. What a great year they had. Went to a regional championship in boys basketball.
Yeah, I was about to mention that. I'm glad you mentioned that Eula Westbrook game, because you talk about that. You're talking about three teams, Eula of ours, Eula, Westbrook, and Jayton, that are really separated by a combined 4 points from a text line team that ended up doing what it did. So those were all three very good, very, I think, not necessarily similar teams, but very evenly matched teams. Yeah, and I think the fact that it was Eula that made it to the state semifinals of that trio was really impressive. So I'm not sure that that was maybe even the most talented team of those three. And I think if you asked Coach Josh Fostel, who unfortunately actually he stepped down at the end of the season, ending his coaching career, a fantastic coaching career. When
Is he going to be missed or what? I'm going to miss Coach Fostel.
When I say unfortunately, it's unfortunate from our standpoint and from Eula's standpoint. Obviously, we wish him the best of luck in his new endeavors, but we will definitely miss him as in the area. But I think he may have ended on what may have been his best coaching performance of his career, which is saying a lot because he has a state championship to his credit. So, but this team to do what it did with maybe some of the personnel holes they had, just because that team had very little size. It was a very small team, and even by 1A standards, and they found ways to defend everybody they played, and they just gritted out games. I think you look even at Westbrook game, when you look at those two teams, the eye test would tell you that Westbrook probably had the stronger team, and Eula just hit shot after shot after shot and was able to hold them off. And then they darn near pulled off that comeback against text line. So just a very gritty basketball team.
That was a very gutty, competitive, feisty basketball team. And you said early on, after having seen them, that you mentioned their grit, but you also mentioned that they were not a vintage Eula team. But you know what? The grit was enough to get them almost to the state championship round.
Yeah, it was. And that's what's cool is when we had Coach Fostel on our podcast, he kind of even mentioned that. He's like, I don't think this is one of my most talented teams, but you mean this was a team that the whole was more than the sum of its parts. It was a team by every definition. They had a couple of really special players, obviously, but it was just a really fun team to watch because they played team basketball, and they they won as a team. I mean, it's just that there's not a whole lot more you can say about them. Just that they got the absolute most out of the talent they had.
And before we wrap up basketball, Dan, I think we need to give a quick shout out to the Lingleville Cardinals in Class 1A. Yet another great effort for those guys. Consistently one of our solid, smaller school programs. They advanced to the regional semifinals where they fall to Grayford 56-51, and that was in overtime. And to get there, they eliminated very good basketball teams from Pretty, another one of ours, and then they eliminated Cherokee 42-38. But another great season for Lingleville, and just a solid program year in and year out.
Yeah, and like you said, that was an overtime loss to Grayford in the region semifinals. So they could have been right there playing for a spot at the state tournament. And as Coach Fostel would tell you, from the time that they spent in Region 3, that bracket's no joke. That is a very difficult region, and Lingleville darn near navigated it and was able to almost got to the region championship there. So a really good season for them as well.
All right, before we jump into baseball, softball, and track, we need to thank our sponsors. First and foremost, Capital Farm Credit, which brings you these Wednesday night podcasts free of charge throughout the school year. Also, for the love of the game broadcasting, and our old friend Terry Slavens, owner of KLAX 93.5 FM out of Breckenridge, KATX 97.7 FM out of Eastland, Classic Country AM 1330 out of Graham, 94.7 FM, KWKQ out of Graham, KROO 1430 out of Breck, and that's an AM station, and KWBY 98.5 FM out of Ranger. That is for the love of the game broadcasting. Also, Phil Hill of the Abilene Realtors Group, big supporter of local athletics. If you're in the market, give Phil a call at 325-669-5153 or visit his website at philhillproperties.com. And finally, Jack's Road Boring out of Snyder, dirt sales and services with service and experience you can count on. Larry Green is the man to call out there. Give him a shout at 325-575-8004. That's Jack's Road Boring in Snyder. And with that, Mr. Youngblood, it's time to take a look at spring sports. And you know what? As long as we've been in this business, you'd think we would stop falling into the trap of thinking, okay, we're in the home stretch. It's spring. We got football behind us. We got basketball behind us. We're in the home stretch. We're going to coast to the finish line. You know what? We never coast to the finish line in the spring. And we are very busy. There's a lot of stuff going on. We might work harder in the spring than any other time. It's hard work in the spring.
Yeah. I mean, it's pretty crazy when you think about it. We go from, the fall, basically football season on, and we finally take a breath after the state baseball tournament last week, look up and it's middle of June, which is pretty wild. This season takes us all the way into the middle of June. And before we know it, we're going to be sitting down and working on football preview stuff. But yeah, I agree. I mean, the spring really doesn't. It doesn't slow down for us. It doesn't slow down for the coaches and some of the kids. Once you get going, you're going, and it makes for a lot of fun. But it does make for a very busy time. But
you wouldn't believe it, man. You wouldn't believe the miles I was putting on the old Renmobile there. I mean, I was all over the place. I went out in the last 3 weeks of the season. I went out to Brock, way out east. I went out to Snyder. I went out to Lubbock. I went out to Midland. I went out to Seminole. I went to Austin twice. I'm telling you, I was on the road a lot over the last 3 weeks of the season. It was a lot of fun, but it was busy.
Yeah, and I
had to gas up at a cotton gin out there near Seminole when I misjudged, the placements of the gas station. I've never done that before. They were nice enough to give me enough gas to get into Seminole.
Yeah, well, I ran out of gas between Seminole and Snyder, so I'm not going to make any comments there. My wife was picking me up at 2 a.m. So
there's nothing out there, man. If you don't have a full tank, you're in trouble.
That was an experience for sure. But one thing that's kind of neat out here is with ACU's facilities, we get a lot of playoff baseball and softball games right here in town for us, which is really convenient. But the thing I love about it is we get a pretty wide array of teams as well right here in our own backyard. So that's kind of neat when you get teams coming to you and you get to see a lot of great games. But you and I both made some of those trips. I went to Seminole as well, like I just mentioned, and then out to Round Rock for Brock State semifinal and some other road trips there. But it's always fun. I love the baseball and softball playoffs. They are very busy though. When you're going out to games, 3 or 4 nights a week, they definitely keep you busy, but a lot of fun for sure.
All right. And with that, we're going to take a look at track and field for 2021. It was a 3-day event held in Austin for the state meet. We'll take a quick peek at that. In day one of the more memorable things that occurred in any sport, any event, was the job that Victoria Cameron of Stephenville did on day one with a gold medal performance in the 100 meters. 11:48 was her time. Not only did that absolutely obliterate her personal best, which was 11:85. I mean, more than 3/10 of a second. You just don't see that in the 100 meters. But it also shattered a school record, which was nearly 40 years old. It dated back to 1982. That's when I graduated. That's old. All right. That's an old record. Okay. And she took the gold medal in 100 meters. She took silver in the 200. And it was just one of the most remarkable athletic achievements that we saw, really, in 2021.
For sure. Yeah, for sure. And what was really neat about that was that she had not lost a single race all year coming into the state tournament. And she really wasn't seated real high in that 100 race. Her seed time had her, really toward the bottom. So she won that one. And unfortunately, she wasn't quite able to make it a double gold experience and finish the entire year without having experienced a second place finish in a race. But still, to go down to state, do what you did in the 100 was, like you said, a truly remarkable story. And then to follow that up with the silver in the 200 and get in return to Stephenville with a couple of medals, that really just completed what was a really phenomenal season for her all year long. And on that same day, you had another kind of first time experience for the Brock boys track team, which won the team title down there, which was a really kind of a neat deal in the fact that Brock boys track had never even won a regional championship until this year, and they were able to do that out at ACU, and then take a really strong contingent with them to Austin and win a team title there. So that was kind of a neat story as well.
All right. Another couple of athletes I think we need to mention. Tori Tyler of Brock winning the 800 meter gold medal in 2:18. And Baylor bound Wall senior Tate Williams, who took double silver down at the state meet in the shot put and the discus. Of course, he's going to be better known, I think, as an offensive lineman by the end of his athletic career. He's going to be playing for the Baylor Bears football team, but a heck of an athlete in track as well.
And very cool story for him as well, in that his big deal was that he wanted to stick around for the end of his senior season strictly to compete at the state track meet, because he was deprived of that opportunity as a junior by COVID. I think he had a really good chance to qualify then, but COVID obviously wiped out the most of the track season. And so to be able to do that with a pair of golds at the region meet, go to state, win a couple of silvers there. Really a strong way to finish his athletic career at Wall, which was really, really impressive. Just all the things he did across multiple sports. In addition to being a great offensive lineman on the football team and a great thrower on the track team, he's also a really effective post player for the basketball team. So he's just a great athlete, a great kid, and a great story.
Okay, another great story, Dan, occurred on day two in Hamlin's Jenna Van Cleve, who on the last throw of her competitive career took gold in the Class 2A girls discus with a throw of 122 feet, 11 inches. Now, she needed to top her personal best of 120 by 2 feet. And she did exactly that. She needed to top a throw of 122.4 by Lauren Olson of Mason in order to take gold. And she did exactly that on her last throw. Last time she's ever going to throw a discus competitively, with her back against the wall, throws 122.11 to take gold. It doesn't get any better than that. It was a great story.
Yeah, that's a great story. There were a couple of them on that day. I mean, you mentioned Van Cleve, and yeah, obviously to have to really bear down and get that throw on your last throw. And we've talked about it before, that the throwing events, there's so much volatility there. I mean, you just everything has to go right to get that perfect throw, and to do that on her last opportunity was really, really cool. But another story that I thought was neat that day, the day two of the state track meet, was Wiley's Kyler Aguilar wrapping up his high school career in the 5A pole vault with a gold medal. He was a kid who took silver as a freshman in the 4A pole vault, had some issues with injuries and things that kind of wiped out most of his sophomore and junior seasons, and obviously COVID contributed there as well. And then to come out as the heavy favorite and to go ahead and take gold in the pole vault, I thought was a really neat story there. But he will be competing collegiately. He's going to Harding to compete there. But just a really, really good athlete, a great pole vaulter, comes from a really strong pole vaulting family, and to go down there as the heavy favorite with a lot of pressure on his shoulders and to go ahead and take care of business, I think was pretty cool.
Okay, a couple other things I want to mention. Most of them taking place on day 2. Vance Ott of Kahoma took gold in both the 400 and 100 meter wheelchair events. He took the 100 meter on day 3, but he also took silver in the boys shot put wheelchair event with a throw of 22.3. Also, I think it bears mentioning what the Haskell maidens did, especially after the disappointment in basketball, to see most of those girls come back during the track season and take medals at state in all 3 relay events. They took bronze in the 400 relay at 49.58 and took silver in the 800 relay at 143.62, and they took silver in the 1600 relay at 406.45. 2 silvers and a bronze. I think that was a great moment for Haskell athletics on that day.
Yeah, very impressive by Haskell. I think that we thought going down, just the fact that they had teams in all 3 relays, that they had a chance to do some really neat things, and they really took care of business. I think that was an impressive accomplishment to do what they did, finishing as the runner-up to Panhandle in the team race. But to go down there and kind of not get overwhelmed by the nerves and those sorts of things, and still manage to go out there and perform well in those relays was pretty cool to see.
All right, on day 3, I think one thing right off the top that bears mentioning, the performance of the Cross Plains girls, especially in the relays. They took gold in the 400 relay at 50.86, Dan, and then they came back in the 800 relay and took silver at 149.60, just behind Ackerley Sands. They did not medal in the 1600 relay, but they still had a day.
Yeah, I mean, they finished within 8 points of the team champion Ackerley Sands, like you said, just right in there in that mix with Wildredo, Miami, and Sands. But a strong day for them. And then one athlete that I was really impressed with was a sprinter on the boys' side. Cage Covington of Roby goes down there, takes silver in the 100. Bronze in the 200. He went in there with strong times, and he was able to come away with 2 medals. So that's always impressive.
Okay. One of our best athletes at the Class 1A level came from Robert Lee. That was Noah Escamilla, who took gold at 6'4", and he had done a personal best of more than 6'6", but 6'4" was good enough for gold on that day.
Yeah, I mean, he was a guy, you don't see this very often in track in particular, but he was a guy at 1A whose height there stood up to anybody's in this area. He's obviously a very, very good athlete, but he's another one that like Kyler Aguilar, goes down there with a lot of pressure, a clear favorite. Everyone expects him to win. And I think it's impressive, in my opinion, when you have that type of expectation based on the performance coming in, and are still able to go out there and perform at your. I mean, like you said, he didn't necessarily perform at his best, but he performed well enough to win the event and to really meet expectations. I thought was pretty impressive.
We had a couple of performers at Class 1A who won multiple medals. On the girls' side, Blackwell's Kylie Cummings took bronze in the 100 meters at 12:51. She also took silver in both the 200 and 400 meters at 26:12 and 59:91, respectively. And then out of Roby, Cage Covington on the boys' side took home 3 medals. He started with bronze in boys' long jump at 21:0 and a quarter. Then he took silver in the 100 meters at 10:75 and took bronze in the 200 at 22:21. That was a lot of hardware to haul home for both of them.
Yeah, and then one more to mention, Monday's Carly Willison, distance runner on the girls' side, took second, silver in the 3,200 meters and bronze in the 1,600. So another one who left with a couple of medals around her neck. So we had several of those, and we always do at the 1A level. We have so many really strong athletes and so many schools at that level. We always seem to perform pretty well, but this year was no exception. A lot of kids went down there and performed really well.
Well, we always come up with some great stories some great storylines, great performances at the state track meet, because we always go there loaded for bear.
Yep.
You know, I mean, we had, I mean, how many athletes total did we send down there? There were dozens and dozens of athletes from the big country. So we had a lot of chances. We had a lot of chances of taking home some hardware. And as usual, the big country did it.
And one last athlete to mention another multi-event medalist was Bella Mahoney out of Strawn, thrower on the girls' side. Took gold in the discus with a throw of 145 feet 8 inches, and took silver in the shot put, finishing behind Guthrie's Abigail Jones there. So, like we said, just a lot of kids did some really special things there, and it was cool to see some of these kids, as many as we had at the 1A level, go out there and come back with multiple medals.
All right, now we're going to jump over to your softball, and we had a state champion. The Stanford Lady Bulldogs took home the gold, won it all, and they did it in dramatic fashion, overcoming a 4-1 deficit to knock off Crawford 5-4. And really, I mean, it was a difficult game between two very nervous teams in front of a huge, very noisy crowd at McCombs Field in Austin. Stanford came out of the gate nervous, made a bunch of mistakes early on. Then after a rain delay, they settled down, and Crawford came back nervous, making mistakes, and that allowed Stanford to come back. And what it was if not a well-played game, at least an interesting and dramatic game. And Citlali Gutierrez was absolutely dominant, only gave up one earned run to a very good Crawford team. And guess what? They've got most of their talent coming back next year.
Yeah, no. And what's funny is you say that game. I think there were some nerves both ways, obviously, with the Airs in that championship game, but it followed an extremely well played game in the semifinals where both teams. I mean, it was as tight as it could possibly be, and Stanford goes and wins that one. I mean, by the skin of their teeth. But this was a really fun Stanford team to watch, just play out, because I think this was a team that everyone expected to take this type of step forward. They had showed some really special things a couple of years ago when all those girls, a lot of those girls were freshmen, and then last year had what they expected to be a really strong season, shut down by COVID. So they came back loaded. They came back excited to get on the field and to prove that they were ready for this type of jump. And the thing that I thought was really pretty cool was that Coach Cynthia Herrera really never backed away from those types of expectations. She kind of said, I think we've got what it takes to win it all. And sure enough, they did. They went and dominated the region. I mean, they really didn't have a whole lot of trouble through their own region, get to state against a couple of teams that were on their level and found ways to win close games. So very, very impressive, a really fun season. And like you said, I think the thing that's scary is how many of these girls will be back next year. They only lose the one senior. So you've got basically your entire lineup. You've got Citlali Gutierrez back in the circle. So that is going to be a scary good team at the Class 2A level. And they're coming off a state championship and have all the confidence that comes with that. So you're going to see a team that comes in with really high expectations, comes in with a lot of confidence, a lot of momentum. The one thing they're going to have to kind of face that they've never had to is being that team that everyone kind of points to as the team to beat. So it's going to be interesting to see how they handle that dynamic next year.
All right, a few other teams that bear mentioning in softball. We can start at a regional championship ball club. Eula in Class 1A pushed all the way to the final game against Borden County, fell short, one win short of reaching the state tournament. They go down 6-3 to Borden County, and that was a ball game in a one-game playoff that could have gone either way. It just didn't fall their way this year.
Yeah, and then the other region finalists you have to mention is Colorado City, which fell to Stanford in a couple of games. They had a really fun series against Anson in the region semifinals to kind of see who would get to play Stanford in that region championship. But a good season for both of those teams. Both those teams are pretty young as well. They're going to be back again next year. And then before we jump to baseball, I think one other thing worth mentioning while we're on the subject of softball is just the success that the Abilene teams had. All three local Abilene high school teams made it to at least the third round, with the Cooper girls going all the way to the fourth before falling to Aledo in 3 games. So you had Wiley reach the region quarterfinals. You had Abilene High reach the region quarterfinals. Wiley lost a tough 2-1 series to Monterey. Abilene High played 2 really close games against South Lake Carroll. that really could have gone either way. And then Cooper, like I said, went 3 games with Aledo in the 4th round. So I think you're starting to see both local and area softball. I think you've started to see the level of play really improve in recent years, and the future looks really, really bright. So that if you are a high school softball fan, this has become a really fun area to follow, in my opinion.
All right, let's jump over to baseball, and let's start off at the Class 4A level, where we had the Stephenville Yellow Jackets reach a state semifinal for the first time in their. They had been invited to a state semifinal years and years ago when it was by invite. So you could say this is the first time they've actually, won their way to a state semifinal, and they fall to Pleasant Grove 13-0. A lot of people can write different things into this. It was a blowout, obviously. It went only, 5 innings. But baseball's a funny game, and weird things happen. And that day, I'll tell you, you have a Stephenville pitching staff that normally has great command. All of a sudden, they put 8 guys on via walk, 2 or 3 other guys on via, hit batsman. They only give up 7 hits, but they give up 13 runs. Obviously, this was not Stephenville's a game that we saw that day. I'm not saying that Pleasant Grove didn't deserve to win. I'm not saying they weren't a better team. But if they played 10 times, Stephenville would get some wins against them. And in a one-game situation, a one-game scenario, anything can happen. And it just went all Pleasant Grove's way that day. It was a sad way to end a dream season for Stephenville, but it was a dream season nonetheless. They closed at 28-9-1.
Yeah, and I think there were kind of 2 dynamics at play probably in that one. One is nerves, because you're talking about a pitcher in Reese Elston who was absolutely dominant to that point, and all of a sudden he loses the strike zone in the state championship or state semifinal. And I think nerves had to have played a factor in that, especially when you're going to a big, nice college ballpark like Dish Falk. And in just that setting, I'm sure that there were probably some of that at play. And the other was, sometimes in baseball and softball in particular, luck plays a big role in it. They hit some balls by all accounts very hard right at people. If those go either way, they get a little bit of momentum on their side. They're feeling better about themselves, and things probably go differently.
Absolute ropes. They hit 7 or 8 balls in that game that were just they were aspirin tablets. They were ropes and just right at people. And when that happens, what are you going to do? But it would have made for a more competitive game. They should have brought home some runs, had those found the mark. They just didn't. They were just right at people. And then you throw in those 8 walks, they hit batsmen and everything else, and it just turned the game into a disaster, a game that could have been far more competitive. It really, I felt for Stephenville that day. It was just one of those days.
And once the tide turns against you, it's hard. It's hard to stop that momentum and get it back. And it's hard not to fall into when you're looking at a lopsided score and on being on the wrong end of it, it's hard not to let that impact you. So obviously when that happens early, that makes for a tough game. And that was kind of interesting. Our other team that reached the state tournament was the Brock Eagles, who reached the Class 3A state semifinals, where they fell to Corpus Christi London 7-2. And their situation was a little different, that they got off to a great start. They did exactly what they want to do. This is a Brock team that likes to start fast, put pressure on the opponent, and then kind of build from there. They score 2 runs playing Brock. They steal 4 bases in the first inning, score 2 runs playing Brock baseball. And then in the second inning, they have a similar situation where Carson Lightfoot, who's been great his entire Brock career, a really good pitcher, had just an unfortunate lapse of command where he walked a couple of guys, gave up a couple of hits, and then he's looking at a 6-run second inning, and all of a sudden instead of being up 2-1, they're down 7-2, and then from there on, it's just a story about the London pitcher Cade Budd, who is just dominant, which was on one hand really fun to watch because he's a crafty lefty, a kid who topped out on the gun at 78 miles an hour, but didn't need a whole lot of velocity to really keep a very good Brock lineup off balance. But he did that. He struck out 10 guys. At one point, I think he retired about 9 or 12 in a row, which if you've watched Brock throughout their playoffs, that does not happen. This is a team that works counts, that finds ways on base, and they just couldn't do it. And when they got down 7-5, they couldn't ever mount that rally they needed to get back in the game. But again, as we said with Stephenville, kind of a frustrating end to the season, but another great season for the Brock baseball program. And they're another team with a lot of kids coming back next year, so they might be right back in the situation again.
Brock closed the season at 29-11-1, and there's another Class 3A team that bears mentioning, one that was lost in the regional semifinals shuffle. The Jim Ned Indians were a ball club that we were looking as, it could maybe make it to state, but they ran into a great team from Shallow Water and fell in 3 games. The good news for Jim Ned is they've got the bulk of their talent back. That was a junior-laden team. And that happens sometimes, the junior-laden teams. If you have a junior-heavy team, you get into that pressure situation. You have a lot of kids that haven't quite been under that pressure yet, and it doesn't come through for you. I was thinking that everything they experienced during the football season would, maybe help push them through in baseball, but it just didn't happen this time around.
And while we're on the topic of 3A, we had a couple other teams that fell to those teams we were just talking about. A really scrappy young early team almost knocked off that Jim Ned team in the 3rd round, falling 3-2, seeing a late rally come up short. And then a Wall team, which I think to some degree was kind of overlooked a little bit this year, just because maybe they weren't as strong as some of the Wall teams we've seen in the recent past. They took Brock 3 games, so that was a really nice accomplishment for them too. So this was a stacked region, as it always is for Big Country baseball in that region, in Region 1 3A, and it was really fun to watch. We had teams in there throughout, and then sticking in the area, we almost got a 3rd team to state in the Anson Tigers, who fell to eventual state champion New Deal in 3 games in the region championship series. And that was a series that absolutely could have gone either way. They lost game 1, which I was at, in 8 innings, a game that they led at multiple points throughout. They lose that one in 8. They win game 2, and then game 3 unfortunately got away from them and got a little lopsided. But
yes,
Anson could have made a run to the state tournament. Albany also lost to that same New Deal team. We had some really good baseball being played at the 2A level in this area as well.
And let's talk about the Wiley Bulldogs locally. This was they made a nice run. Just eventually you're going to run into a big hurdle. And that was the case with Wiley falling to a very good Aledo team and finally getting knocked out.
Yeah, and I think that Wiley team's definitely worth mentioning, in that this was a really senior-heavy team, a team that had kind of pointed to this season as the one where this is the season we're going to make our deep run. And they got to the region semifinals and caught an Aledo team that's fantastic. They've got a catcher and a guy who closes a little bit that's going to TCU that is just an absolute amazing baseball player. And they lost game 1 6-5 in 9 innings in an absolute classic, losing on a bloop single at the end of that one. And then in game 2, it was a 2-1 game late, and they ended up losing that one 6-1. Things got away from them in the last few innings, but this Wiley team had a great season. I don't think they have anything at all to be ashamed of or hang their heads of. I know it was tough to see this season because it was such a strong senior group. You don't have very many 10-player senior classes, even at the 5A level, particularly when you've got, I think, 7 or 8 of those going to play college baseball. This was a really good, talented group of seniors for this Wiley team. And then to get to the region semifinals, I think was an accomplishment, particularly given the fact that they lost and bowed out to a very worthy Aledo team. So it was a fun baseball season. I think we had a lot of really good baseball being played at just about every level. And one team we didn't mention that I'm going to mention before we cut this off is, again, the Westbrook Wildcats. They had a great baseball season too. They made it all the way to the region championship round before falling to Westbrook. And that was a wild series. They lose game 1 17-2, come back in game 2 and lose 2-1, 2-1. So which I think tells you that's a team that was there to compete. I mean, it would be very easy after losing game 1 that way to let things, just to kind of accept your fate, particularly against the Nazareth team that had only lost 1 game to that point. But they come back and give them all they want in game 2 and dang near made it to the state tournament.
What an athletic school year for Westbrook. It has to be the best ever. And if they can dig up one, they might have to go back to the Crimean War to find one that's, that good. I mean, they were great all the way across the board. They had 3 shots to get into state with 3 different sports.
And that's the only shame, is that they weren't quite able to crack that in any of those. But you look at it, they lose by 1 bucket in the Eula game and the boys basketball. That very easily could have gone the other way.
Yes, a lot of heartbreak.
In baseball, it's a 2-1 game in game 2 with a chance to send it to game 3. So you're talking about some really competitive games with teams that eventually did go and do some special things at the state tournament. So I agree with you. This was a very memorable year for Westbrook boys, and then you add in what the girls basketball team did. It was a banner year for Westbrook athletics in general. Just a pretty awesome season for that group.
One other thing that we want to mention before we wrap up the podcast tonight, we want to mention to you that we've got our All Big Country Preps teams uh, right around the corner. We're going to be releasing them in our first ever All Big Country Preps track team, which will be in the form of our All Big Country Preps Dream Track Meet. And then we'll also have, of course, our All Big Country Preps softball team and our All Big Country Preps baseball team, honoring the best athletes in all three of those sports.
Yeah, keep an eye out for that. You'll definitely want to check that out. These are always a cool way, in my opinion, to get these kids the recognition they deserve for the seasons they had. And there were a lot of kids this year that had some really special seasons. So it's going to be fun putting those together.
Before we wrap things up, we want to remind you that we've got 3 separate subscription packages here at bigcountrypreps.com. We've got a monthly for $5 a month. We've got a semi-annual subscription, 6 months, and where we knocked that price down to $4 a month. And then we've got an annual 12-month subscription where we knocked the price down to $3 a month. $36 for a full year of Big Country High School athletic coverage.
We'd also like to remind you, if you ever see a photo you like in any one of our galleries, it is available for just $7. You can click on that small shopping cart icon to the bottom right, follow that prompt, and purchase as many of those as you would like. But scroll around the site, you'll notice that we took a whole lot of photos from this past school year. So make sure you check those out, and also check out our Big Country Preps photo archive, which just continues to grow and grow, which has every photo that we've taken since we started the site in 2018. But we take a lot of photos here. It's something we take a lot of pride in. It's something we really enjoy here at bigcountrypreps.com.
All Big Country, all high school, all the time. Welcome home.